Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is the board and staff training breakout session, so hopefully y'all are all in the right one. Up first, we have Steve Kosub, who is the Senior Water Resource Counsel for the San Antonio Water System, and he's going to talk about board governance training. Let's welcome Steve.
Well, thank you all very much. I'm very grateful to Mr. Aaron and Ms. Schlesinger. They're not here to hear this in person, and the Planning Committee for allowing me to share a few minutes with you this afternoon. And I'm also grateful to each of you for taking the time to be here. I have to say, up to this point, this is one of the most remarkable water programs I've been to in a long time. So think of me as comic relief, and we can perhaps get you through the afternoon. I think it's a credit to Sarah that she recognized that even though the policy positions of the San Antonio water system and policy positions that I have advocated in the past are frequently at odds with those of the groundwater districts, we nonetheless have much in common, and I think that's true of public governing bodies everywhere. It's my hope this afternoon that we can share some of those commonalities, and let me say, this is a lot more fun if it's an engagement and not a lecture. So if you have questions or something on your mind as we proceed, please jump in. Don't feel like you need to wait. I love to hear what you have to say. Let me ask, how many of you are new board members? Okay, so that's good. I mean, I think that's our primary goal here this afternoon. And what I'm going to say is going to sound very basic, almost simplistic. And you may wonder why you're here and not learning about laser technology in the next room. But let me say, as simplistic and basic as it is, it never seems to get any easier. It never seems to get any less complex in the execution. And that's why I think we're having this discussion this afternoon, to review some of the basic principles and operating processes of governance. So what do we mean by that? What is governance? Well, and I will say that I did this in deference to Ms. Schlesinger. I use the Oxford dictionaries instead of the Webster dictionaries. But the definition isn't too different. Governance, oddly enough, is the action or manner of governing. So this is from the Texas Constitution. This is sort of the foundation from which your work derives. Districts shall be governmental agencies and bodies politic and corporate with such powers of government and with the authority as may be conferred by law. So, what does that mean for you? Well, the Texas Water Code, the Texas legislature have told us that the governing body of a district is the board of directors. And I want to stress, I want to read that definition or that statement a little bit more closely, and I want you to keep this in mind as we proceed. The governing body of a district is the board of directors. It doesn't say directors are in charge of a district. It says the governing body of a district is the board of directors. So what does this mean? What principles will guide your work in the 35,000-foot elevation sense? Come in, please, please, please. You can't sit up here, but you can sit there. That's the only rule. There's actually all sorts of literature on governance. It's interesting to see how much. I will say that much of that literature addresses governance of corporate entities and to a certain extent, nonprofit private entities. Please, come in, come in. There's less literature on governance of public entities, and there's a great deal of difference between the private and public work, some of which we'll touch on. I have synthesized the principles that I think important into 5. The first of those is integrity. The next, leadership. The next, transparency. The next, accountability. And the next, fairness. Integrity. What do we mean by integrity? Well, these are my thoughts: being honest, fair, independent, honoring the letter and spirit of the law, recognizing, declaring, and managing conflicts of interest. What do I mean by a conflict of interest? Anybody want to take a shot at that? A conflict of interest as a member of the board. It's pretty straightforward stuff. You're about to approve a permit application, or I'd be asked to approve a permit application, and it just so happens it's owned by your wife and you have a 50% interest. That's a conflict of interest. That's pretty straightforward. They can be a lot more subtle than that, but that's what we mean by conflicts of interest. And again, it's a threefold process. There's actually a law that addresses this, a very specific statute that will define what a minimum conflict of interest is, but that doesn't have to be the sole guide to your conscience. There may be other conflicts that you feel keep you from doing your work as a board member. A three-part challenge. First of all, you have to recognize that the conflict exists. Oh, really? That's a conflict if I'm approving my wife's permit and I own half of it? Yeah, you have to recognize that. You have to declare it. You have to make that conflict public. And then you have to deal with it, manage it. What does that mean? It might mean stepping down from consideration of that matter. It might mean something else, but you have to deal with it. Ultimately, integrity is all about doing the right thing. And I'm sure some of you roll your eyes and say, right, Kosub, we really need you to stand here and lecture us on doing the right thing. Thanks a lot. I'm going to go get a chocolate chip cookie. But I will tell you, it's not that easy. Hopefully we will circle back and have some time at the end of this presentation, and I'll give you a pop quiz about doing the right thing. It's more challenging than you might think when you step into the role of an elected public official. Leadership. Establishing policies and strategic goals. A while ago we talked about the board of directors, and this one is very, very important. What is your role as a member of the board? Your role is establishing policies and strategic goals. The big picture. That's your challenge. There's a second piece to that people don't like to talk about as much, and that's providing the necessary resources to achieve your goals. We heard discussion yesterday, we heard some more today, and we quite frankly hear it all the time about the financial challenges that groundwater districts face, and I understand they are true and they are significant. Nonetheless, you can't do something for nothing. So your responsibility as a member of a board of directors is not only to establish policies and strategic goals, but to recognize that the ball is in your court, the buck stops on your desk, to provide the necessary resources to achieve those goals. You can complain to your staff all day long that they're not getting enough permit applications approved in a timely manner, but if you don't give them the funds for staff to do that, your complaints will be a little bit hollow. The funding is a challenge. I have my own thoughts on how groundwater districts can address funding in the future. You may have yours. Certainly the legislature has its own thoughts. The bottom line is that the challenge of providing the resources to establish policies and strategic goals and achieve those goals falls in your court. Monitoring and evaluating the achievement of goals. It's not enough just to say you want to do something. To tell staff to do something, you need to follow through. How are we doing? That can be done in a number of ways. But the main thing is that it be done in some fashion so that you're not just setting it and walking away. You're keeping score of yourself as you proceed through your duties. And finally, you have established the policies and strategic goals. It's also your obligation to support your staff and hold them to account as a board. And I want to stress that. The responsibility is yours as a board. Individual directors will have a very limited role in this, and we'll talk about that a bit more. Transparency. We've heard that word used a couple of times in the last couple of days. What does it mean? Well, groundwater districts in this state are public entities. You are an elected public official. That means that your work is the public's work. Later on today, we're going to hear, I think, about the Texas Public Information Act. And I have to tell you, the Texas Public Information Act has one of the most extraordinary statements of legislative intent and purpose of any statute I've ever read. It's too long for me to share with you now. It's a half page that basically says the business of the public is the public's, and the work you do as a public servant is the public's work. And that means the public has a right to know about what you're doing, however uncomfortable that may be, and it will often be very, very uncomfortable. It's up to you to ensure regular and effective communication with the stakeholders, and there are many stakeholders. Stakeholders may include your landowners in your district, they will include your voting constituents, they will include permit applicants, they will include staff, they will include the state, they will include river authorities affected by your work. There is no limit on the number of stakeholders that will have an interest in what you do. It's your challenge, your responsibility to communicate effectively with those people. And I have to say that's gotten a lot easier than it used to be and a lot less expensive because of this wonderful device called the internet and the web. Some of the districts in this state have just remarkable websites. You can achieve wonderful results with your website. At a minimum, you include agendas of your meetings, minutes of your meetings. You can include reports of your committee activities. You can include links to other relevant material, statutes, legislative activities, Water Development Board, TSEC. All of these materials can be made available cheaply and easily on the web. And it's a wonderful, wonderful tool for communicating. And finally, transparency means responding to stakeholders' questions and their concerns. A lot of ways to do that. It can be very, very, very challenging, but it's very, very important. That requires less of a reminder to you because you will be an elected official and your constituents will no doubt let you know if you are responding to their questions and concerns in a suitable way. Accountability. Again, it's not enough just to establish these goals. We have to measure our progress. Fair and clear disclosure of success and failure. How do you do that? A lot of ways. Maybe it's your website. Maybe it's regular reports you issue within your district, your management reports, your reports to state agencies. All will be effective tools. But at the end of the day, you need to ensure that the reports your district is generating, the information you're generating, is fair and clearly discloses your work, whether it's a happy report or an unhappy report from your perspective. Basic things common to all organizations, whether private or public. Internal financial controls, so basic and so important. Whether your budget is small or your budget is large, the fact that your general manager has worked with you for 35 years doesn't necessarily get them any leeway in your responsibility to ensure financial accountability. Again, there are state required methodologies for achieving this, your audit, your regular financial reporting, but it's your job to make sure that those things are done correctly. Just last week out of Lewiston, Maine, a Farmers Fair Association was having to cancel the fair that was to occur this week because one of their board members left with $80,000. Who would have thought? Their friend and neighbor and had been responsible for funds for a very long time, but somebody got slipshod in reviewing the financial accounting. It's a big deal. It's sort of one of those minimal basement level responsibilities that you assume as a member of a board. Risk assessment and management. Ongoing process. What are the risks to which your district is exposed? They might be litigation risks, they might be financial risks, you might be running out of money, they might be political risks. All of these things are your responsibility to understand and analyze and address. Let me ask you a basic question on the category of risk assessment. how many of you have asked your general manager to see your director's liability insurance policy that makes sure you're protected if you are sued as a director? So you guys have got some serious risk assessment and management to do here. And finally, fairness. It's a pretty broad concept. Impartial and unbiased treatment of stakeholders and respect for due process of law. Again, it sounds basic. Who are you to lecture me on this, Steve Kosub? But it's pretty hard. Impartial and unbiased treatment of the stakeholders when one of the stakeholders is your neighbor with whom you go to church every Sunday, and the other stakeholder is a water developer from a distant city. How do you ensure that you as a board member remain fair and impartial in dealing with these individuals? So basic principles. What do we have? Integrity, leadership, transparency, accountability, and fairness. So let's talk about practice a bit. How do we put these principles into practice in the very short time that we have to address the subject? There are 2 points this afternoon that I hope you will take away from this meeting, if they are the only 2 points that you take away. And this is the first. The board is a collective entity. It functions only as a collective entity. The importance of that cannot be overstated. You've been elected as a public official, you're director of the board, and you think that's pretty important stuff, and it is. But your role is not as an individual director. Your role is as a member of a collective entity that functions only in that capacity. What does that mean? That means that decisions of your groundwater district are made only in public. A board of directors acts only in public and only through a vote. It also means that discussion of public affairs to the maximum extent possible should be conducted in public for the benefit of the public. And there are exceptions to that. They will be discussed this afternoon in connection with the Texas Open Meetings Act. But at the end of the day, the less private discussion that you conduct as a member of the board with other members of the board, the better you will be and the better served will be the public. You function as an entity and not as an individual when you become a member of a board of directors. An effective board focuses on policy, strategic goals, and results. We've talked about that. So here's point 2 for you to take away with you this afternoon, I hope. Governance and management are different. Governance is your responsibility. Management is the responsibility of your staff. Certainly there is some overlap between those 2 undertakings, but it should be minimized. Recognizing the overlap, recognizing the distinct roles requires judgment, respect, and restraint, both on your behalf and on behalf of your staff. But you were not elected to the board of directors of a groundwater district. In most cases, there may be exceptions to this in Texas, but I'm not aware of them. You were not elected to manage the staff. You were not elected to make sure that an employee is getting to work on time or that another employee is spending too much time on the web. You were elected to focus your considerable talents and attention on policy, strategies, and results. And the people you hire to manage the district are charged with these other functions. Did I see a hand there? I'm sorry. What does that mean in practice? Assuming you have a general manager, I think most of you do. It means your job is to supervise the general manager. It's the general manager's job to supervise the rest of the staff. Those roles must be respected. The board, again, the board should speak to the general manager with one agreed voice. You may have your own policy on what that agreed voice is. In many cases, in many governance structures, it's the chairman of the board. That's not necessarily the case. But the key is to ensure that the general manager knows where she or he is looking to receive the direction of the board that supervises them and writes their performance report. The general manager, in return, must ensure that the board is fully informed. It's not the general manager's prerogative to keep you in the dark or to hide bad news from you or to put a gloss on the news that you do get. The general manager must ensure that you are fully informed of the district's affairs at all times. But again, the flow of exchange, ideally, will be from the board through the GM to the staff and vice versa, from the staff through the GM to the board. The board should not engage in administration, should not engage in day-to-day management for a variety of reasons. I will tell you, as simple as this sounds, in 42 years now of representing local government entities, it is the single largest source in my experience of board failure, governance failure, litigation, unhappiness. The challenge people face in respecting their respective roles. So let's talk about some more mundane things. Again, I'm sorry if this is simple. I've been to a lot of meetings. I counted up once, somewhere north of 2,000 commission, board, council meetings in a very enjoyable career. The issues are always the same, whether they're cities or, again, commissions or other types of boards. What are some of the basic ways that you can best discharge your responsibilities and ensure that the needs of your district are met? The facility. These vary widely in the state. Again, you're charged with ensuring that these things happen, a comfortable and accessible facility for the public. A reasonable time for your meetings. This one, I think, is much underestimated in importance. I will tell you my favorite client, City Council, had its city council meetings at 8:30 in the morning. Well, I'll tell you, that was really cool. Everybody was rested and happy and friendly, and you walk in the room, the coffee was percolating, and it was just a good deal. Everybody felt good. But you know, it really wasn't a good deal because most of the public couldn't attend the meeting at 8:30 in the morning. In this particular community, a little bit of a silk stocking community, it worked for them because most of them didn't go to work till 9:30. But for the public, 8:30 morning meetings were probably not really a great idea because you shut out the public, or you shut out much of the working public. My favorite meetings, I think, were for the city of Seguin years ago. City council meetings at 5:30. And I'll tell you, that worked pretty good. People could stop the meeting on the way home from work. Pretty good access for the public. Everybody was still reasonably fresh and ready to go. They were hungry, so the meetings didn't drag on any longer than they needed to be because everybody wanted to go home and get dinner. 5:30 worked pretty well. The worst meetings, in my experience, and there were some really bad meetings in this experience, were those that occurred at night, 7:30 at night. For a variety of reasons, these meetings tended to be the most contentious. They tended to last the longest. I finally decided, after a very long time, that part of this is simply because people go home and drink at 5 o'clock and they come to your meetings liquored up. And I mean, you know, it's one of those funny little specific things that can dramatically change the tone and tenor and productivity of your meeting. So reflect on when you're meeting. Whatever your time is, make sure it's there for a reason, not something that's just carried over for 20 years. It can be important. A manageable agenda. This is so important. You can't have too much on your agenda. You've got to be realistic about what you're going to be able to address. You've got jobs. The public has jobs. Your staff is tired. So Make sure your agenda is manageable in terms of the topics that you are able to address. If you need more meetings, have more meetings, but don't make a meeting so burdened with an agenda that it becomes completely unproductive and unmanageable. You've all heard the old adage. It's one of my favorites and one of the truest. I think the world is run by those who show up. And let me tell you, that's important for board members. Your responsibilities as a board member, be prepared. It's not enough to go into the agenda and have the general manager hand you a big packet that you've never seen, never had an opportunity to read. Or worse, to walk into the meeting with the packet that you got a week before that you've never looked at or read. When you get those packets from your general manager, you need to read it, because that's the business you're going to be asked to address, whether it's a contract or a management plan or a human resources policy. If you don't want the job, don't run for the office. These things need to be read. You need to be prepared when you walk into the meeting. You need to walk into the meeting. You need to be present to be an effective board member. Everybody's going to have some absences once in a while, but to do this job right, you simply have to be there, and it's going to mean sacrificing some other obligations, perhaps some other interests. And finally, you want to be engaged in a board meeting. It's a mystery and a frustration to me, the number of people that run for public office or assume public positions, but then don't feel the responsibility to participate in the public discussion. Some people are quieter than others, I understand that, but your job as a board member carries the responsibility of being engaged in the discussion of the board. So important, respectful dialogue. Oh, and we've lost this in our society. We've lost this in government at all levels, and nothing could be more critical to your success than recognition of the need for respectful dialogue between board members and between board members and staff. One of these city council meetings at 7:30 that is seared in my mind. It was one of my earliest clients. I will never forget walking into the first meeting when the staff was lined up against the back wall. The public was between the staff and the city council, and the city council was on its dais, and the room was dark, and the staff was yelling at the board, and the board was shouting epithets back at the staff, and the public was sort of joining in whichever way the spirit moved them. And, that's simply no way to conduct the public's business. It can be hard. You may have to bite your tongue. You may have a witty riposte all prepared for your fellow board member, but if you can manage to maintain that respect in your dialogue, you're going to have such a more successful experience. This opportunity for public comment, it's certainly important, but limitations are essential. What do I mean by that? Well, most public meetings have an opportunity at some point in the meeting for citizens to be heard. That's the common denomination. And it means that's the time for a citizen to come up and talk to you either about something that's on the agenda or something that's not on the agenda. There are some rules about it that we may discuss in the Open Meetings Act discussion. There's actually no statutory requirement that you have a citizens to be heard, but it's certainly good politics and it's certainly good public policy. So you want to have an opportunity when citizens can appear before you to express their concern about your work or some other issue. But it should be limited, and it should not be a dialogue with you, the board member. It should be their comment. And the response to their comment should be the board chairman saying, "Thank you, Mrs. Jones. We will be sure to look into that, and either the general manager or I will respond to you in writing before the next meeting, or we will have an agenda item to address this issue at the next meeting." But you should not engage with a citizen at that moment, because when you do, you lose control of the meeting. Again, there should be a reasonable opportunity, short, 3 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. Whatever you think suits your community, probably no longer than that. I'm not a believer in the notion of I'm going to give my time to the next citizen, and I'm going to, so people stack up 5 people's time on one presenter, so they're talking to you for 30 minutes. A lot of people do that. I think it's not very effective. That's for you to decide, but at the end of the day, remember, when they're finished commenting, they get to go home. You've got to stick around and do the business of the district and the business of the public until it's complete. And the more time you spend at the beginning of the meeting, when everybody is relatively fresh and happy and good humored, the less time you're going to have to address these issues at the end. Am I running out of time? Sorry. Opinions don't have to be unanimous. People are going to disagree on many matters, but when a vote is taken, it should be the decision of the board, respected and supported by all. Take advantage of these kind of training opportunities. Hopefully they won't all be at the Hyatt Hill Country Resort, and your constituents will have a little less to say about it. Training is important. Don't hesitate. Don't be embarrassed about engaging in training. Finally, engage, utilize, and respect good legal counsel. People like Greg Ellis sitting in the back of the room. Bill, we've got all sorts of fine lawyers here at this program that are here on their own dime. Use these people. I promise you an ounce of prevention is worth a comment here. Thank you very much.
Do we have any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Is it appropriate in public comment for a board member to ask a follow-up question to a member of the public?
I would say it is not, and there are actually some guidelines under the Open Meetings Act about that you risk the fact that a non-agendized item, a non-agenda item, will become a subject of discussion with the board, which would be a violation. And so again, I would say not. Whatever the comment is, deal with it respectfully. We'll be back to you. Make sure you get back to them, but don't continue the discussion from there. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Steve, I'm just curious about how you can be effective to convince a city council member not to interfere with the administration of the city manager.
Well, it's one of the biggest challenges, and you kindly said city council member, but it's no different for members of a board of directors. Some people you never convince, and those are the circumstances that invariably will end up in a very expensive lawsuit. It's the responsibility of the board chairman or the mayor as a presiding officer to do what that individual can to bring some discipline to the body that they lead. But it's got to be leadership. It's not a dictatorship. At the end of the day, they're elected officials. Every time a board member steps into the office and takes the time of the general manager, I can promise you the general manager is going to take whatever time is required to respond, because these people are setting their salary and writing their performance review. But every minute the general manager spends talking to that board member is a minute she's not spending on the business of the district. So I don't have a good answer for you. It's an ongoing cosmic mystery and probably the biggest challenge that boards face. Thank you.
Any more questions?